made a video last year titled The Great Self-Insertion. It was reasonably popular. Today I want to talk about some related and similar themes that afflict modern entertainment, modern media, modern escapism. As many of you know, I spend copious amounts of time trying to escape the misery of life, so this is near and dear to my heart. In that video, I posited that women, by dint of anecdotal evidence, because no one really seems to want to study this, and I could imagine why, really have a need to self-insert themselves into fantasy. And the primary difference between men and women when it comes to fiction is that men, on average, view fiction as sort of aspirational, and women view fiction as relatable, or rather, they view it in a way such that it must be made relatable to them, lest they're incapable of enjoying it to the same degree. And this is where the concept of self-insertion comes in, of course, because if something's not relatable to you, then you have to make it relatable by basically putting yourself in the shoes of the person in the work of fiction, be it a book, a film, a video game. And as a consequence of this, you get a lot of fan fiction written primarily, almost entirely, although not exclusively, almost entirely by women. Because fan fiction is all about making things relatable and seeing yourself in the situation. Men, on the other hand, create figures that are, like I said, aspirational. You aspire, at least in theory, to be like them, even if it's just a video game or a film. You look up to them. They're meant to be exemplars of something, sometimes of good, sometimes of evil, sometimes of some other virtue or vice, but they're meant to embody something, and they don't need to be relatable. Joe the Fireman doesn't need to make some epic fantasy hero another Joe the Fireman, because in all likelihood, even if he's not aware of that, he's still trying to escape the misery of his life. And so it's fundamentally a different approach. Needless to say, this has caused a tremendous amount of damage and havoc throughout escapist genres, film, comic books, media, and above all, video games. Well, today I want to talk about the process of how this happens. Now, the process itself is called something I'm not really allowed to say on YouTube, but I'll use a synonym, the en-crap-ification, as in the turning to crap of something, that occurs when something used to be X and over time it morphs into K, which is to say it goes through several different phases before it turns into the fecal matter resembling object that you're currently viewing in the current year. And unfortunately, in the current year, women play a very large role in this en-crap-ification process. And depending on what your perspective is or where you stand, this may be a good thing or a bad thing, but certainly from the male perspective, the general male perspective, it's not a good thing, because the things that are becoming en-crap-ified are things that are usually very male-oriented. So here's the thing that's actually quite interesting about women, maybe even utterly fascinating, is that women have their own interests. Obviously, they're quite different from male interests on average. But when it comes to having a large presence online, be it a comic book, be it a film, be it a video game, women will sacrifice their own personal interests, which is to say, the types of video games they actually enjoy, the types of written fiction they actually enjoy, the types of films they actually enjoy. They will sacrifice that to chase objects of status manifested in the entertainment industry. Now, this shouldn't surprise anyone because women assign a great deal of importance to status. This is nothing new. But the fact that they're willing to transgress their own particular proclivities and interests, let's say they're interested in some Jane Austen remake film or Animal Crossing or The Sims, but those particular things are not getting the media attention that a Star Wars film or game might get, or a Spider-Man game, they will jettison the things that they're interested in air quotes now, to pursue this other thing. That's how important status is to women, even in the realm of non-mating, which is to say pure entertainment, pure distraction, pure fiction, pure escapism. With that said, mating preferences and how we evolved affects everything, including our taste in fiction, so it shouldn't be too surprising. So on the screen, you can see various depictions of how things start off and how they become degraded over time. This isn't just about change, like Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition transitioning to 3rd edition and later 3.5. Those were, for example, organic changes wrought by people who thought it would make the game better overall. This is about a specific type of change that takes place essentially when outsiders who are not interested in the core material, the core theme, if you will, of whatever it might be, a tabletop game, a film, it doesn't matter. They come in and they don't really like what they see. And so they try to change it to something that they quote unquote like, and then over time it morphs, it loses popularity, and the people that came to change the very thing that they didn't like tend to leave, typically women. I'm not generally a fan of hyperbolic language, as you will frequently encounter throughout the manosphere, but it's hard to not use the word parasitic in this case, because if a bunch of people come in, they're taking advantage of something, they're using its resources, as you will. They use the resources up for their own purposes, and then when the thing is fundamentally transformed, and it remains a husk of its former glory. Now, obviously, there are cultural, political factors here. This isn't just a matter of women. So if you've been paying attention at all to what's been happening in a lot of classical, traditional fantasy settings, including Amazon's, for whatever reason, renewed second season Lord of the Rings, you have orc families there. And orc families are kind of impossible because orcs are creatures of pure evil whose exact origin is not known, but you see them sort of made in cauldrons. They basically live to slaughter and plunder, and that's pretty much their purpose. Likewise, you see orcs in Dungeons & Dragons traditionally inheriting their profile, as it were, from Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. Mostly and largely irredeemably evil. There are always some exceptions, and those exceptions were what made these exceptions interesting. The same thing with the Drow and the Dark Elves. I'm sure you've heard of Drizzt Do'Urden, the famous renegade Dark Elf. Why is a renegade Dark Elf so interesting and compelling as a figure? Because the entire Drow and Dark Elf society that abase themselves to the Spider Queen, an extremely evil and depraved goddess, they're something like 99.8% evil. That's why that character is compelling. However, these days in D&D, Dark Elves are not evil. Neither are the orcs. They can be anything. And so this watering down is a perfect example of what we see. The core ideas that used to be represented disappear, largely in an effort to appeal to normies, women, with strong cultural ideological undercurrents there. Because you need to consciously think something up, like having an orc family in a major fantasy film production, or claiming something like 50 years of a story of evil dark elves worshipping an evil spider goddess, replete with millennia-long plus internal civil wars between the dark elves and the high elves, and tons of history, and then say, well, that might have happened, but doesn't really matter anymore. And you see this with many hobbies again and again. One of the video games that's recently received a lot of praise, it's not my genre at all, is Space Marines 2. It's been praised because it's really just a purely masculine game. You go out and you shoot stuff. The enemies of the Emperor, the enemies of mankind. It's very true to the lore, etc., etc. People are praising A because it's fun, that's the biggest factor, and B because it doesn't really resemble the modern slop that we're fed constantly. All the characters are male, it conforms to the original lore of Warhammer 40k. And again, even though it's not my genre, I don't really play shooters typically, it is a very good game. And in a different world, it would just be a fun game rather than a kind of anomalous masterpiece in a sea of sludge. Now, I don't think this is going to happen, but what I really want to see is studies conducted on the differences between men and women and how they interact with social media, and specifically how products change over time with the influence of women. Is it likely this is going to happen? No, but we do have, for example, I've mentioned her a few times, Corey Clark. She's a psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania, I believe, and she studies the effects of women being overrepresented in academia, specifically the different approaches that men and women have when it comes to science. Women being more interested in harm reduction, and men on average being more interested in the truth. Now, obviously, there's some overlap. We're talking about broad averages, but these types of studies would be very interesting because, again, all we have at this stage is anecdote. But long or short term, I see only one solution to this problem, and that is for independently wealthy people or people with enough money to come up with their own stuff and practice exclusion. Now, in principle, I'm not a huge fan of exclusion when it comes to hobbies, because part of the original point of these hobbies was that they were open, by and large, to everyone. It's just the people that they appealed to and the people that took interest in them had a genuine interest in basically adhering to the established rules and the codes of conduct that had been established in the hobbies. And so, in this particular instance, some sort of exclusivity and people with enough money, to be perfectly honest, to be able to create these things and maintain them. Who's going to have the interest and the money to do so? Probably not many people, maybe no one, but at this stage of the game, that's probably the only solution. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons on Patreon and my donors on PayPal. You guys are the best. Keep the channel alive. Without you, all would be for naught. Much appreciated. And if you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, it'd be appreciated as well. Until the next time, if I'm still alive, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye for now. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.